Okay, this is our midterm, I guess, post-midterm review. So we already have the questions and you've already submitted your answers. And so this is a time normally where I would set aside um, one class period to talk about the midterm and our learning objectives and sort of set us up going forward. Um, so that's what we'll do here. Um, Instead on this video, and you will get a short quiz. I'll ask just a couple quick questions, just you can prove that you watched, um, because it is an important step. One, because you're probably not going to get your midterm back until Wednesday, so there'll be another class period, and learning the stuff that went before involves some amount of sort of self-review, and so while you are just a couple days away from having taken the exam, picking your 4 questions and answering them to the best that you could, it's good to take a look at what I consider to be sort of the simplest way to put down a correct answer. So these are not absolute keys. When you get your exam back, you will get partial credit spread throughout for even where you have things that are wrong or incomplete. But most of these questions can be answered with a very short statement or a short calculation. So I want to be sure that you understand just the sort of simplest path and to get to a correct answer. So the exam was split into 2 parts, Part 1 and Part 2. The learning objectives that match up to Part 1 really is this sort of idea of combining economic theory and statistical techniques to analyze the demand side of a market. So we actually motivated that. We had a small book chapter, a lecture over that, and then we did a couple of labs devoted to this. It's important to note that we didn't do empirical supply. We did not estimate a supply equation, but it's fundamentally the same. You collect data, you just try to decide on a functional form, and you try to understand how the supply side of a market responds to prices. We leave that because we have to cover it in some detail later. There's a reason to focus on the supply side of the market when we do multi-market situations, or what you might think of as supply chain, where we think of an ag producer who is a seller of commodities, farm commodities, but they're a purchaser of inputs, so they become a demand and supplier in some sense. And so we have to cover their supply behavior there. We did topics that I thought were sort of fair for the exam, where you were either asked to write something or do a quiz question or something from a lab. On statistical quality, I put that in quotes because that's probably not what a statistician would want to call this, but it's really making your judgment, being sound about the way you use statistical information, especially measurements on error or measurements on statistical tests. Functional form was where we decided about how to consider homogeneity and linear versus nonlinear forms, or that log linear form. Economic specification is a little bit broader topic that says what form are you going to use and what things are you going to include when you try to empirically assess demand. And then finally, economic interpretation is when you get the results, how do you give them meaning in an economic setting. Here was our model. It shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. It looks pretty much the same as everything we've been doing. The difference is it's log linear. Okay, so every variable here was in log terms, and the dependent variable of this regression was log quantity of pork. Okay, but you have your R-squareds here. You have the coefficients that were estimated, t-stats, p-values, and confidence intervals. I did not put means of the variables around because you don't need them. That was hopefully a giveaway to you that if you ever calculate an elasticity here, and I haven't given you the mean, it must mean that you don't need any additional information beyond the coefficient. First question was, hopefully everybody was expecting, what regression equation could be used for this, and it's just the log of Q is equal to a set of coefficients, including an intercept, multiplying the log prices and the log income. Add an error term to it. And again, like I told you, I leave this off a lot, so it's not a big deal if you forget it, but if you did, this is your reminder that there is an error term on that when you call it a regression equation. What criticism could you offer here? So here I've written a paragraph. You can go read it in the key or pause and read it. But there are really two things that matter. So if you're talking about the quantity of pork demanded, then only having the pork price and beef price might seem to be limiting. That might not give us enough information. And I guess specifically what I'm aiming at here is there were quite a few problems that when we did the problem in lab, you had three prices. You had pork price, beef price, and poultry price. So an obvious case you might look at is, why is the poultry price not here? And would that provide us more information? Is the beef price having to represent too many substitute prices here? Would be how an economist might interpret that. The other one that's obvious is homogeneity doesn't hold. Okay, so these are not logarithms of price ratios and an income ratio. These are logarithms of the regular variables. That means homogeneity has not been imposed, and there could be this sort of money illusion effect in these. And so that's two criticisms that could be dealt with. And then of course C depends on what you put for B, but correcting either one of those would be adding a price, or for the homogeneity, declaring a numeraire variable, right? So given the model we have here, make the beef price a numeraire. This first term becomes log of pork price divided by beef price, and this becomes log of income divided by beef price. So anything that would fix either of your problems. And if you put a third, some other option down in B, even if it's not what I would consider the easiest one to understand, or if it might has some kind of problem with it, as long as C fixes it, then C is fine. So you can see how partial credit may work here. I can't list everything, and there's certainly options that I haven't listed here. So when you read this, it's more of a guide to do the exam, not a key. Question 2 is all about statistical quality. I talked about all of these in the video we had preparing for the exam, so you could go back and watch that. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but when you're asked to provide a judgment or explanation of quality about the overall regression, that's when you look at R squared and the F statistic, including its significance value, and this one meets all the criteria we would say for 99% confident that our model, this picture of demand we put together statistically, is better than just not using that picture, not using that model, or the other way of saying it is just using the quantity of pork, the average quantity of pork demand to predict new values for that. For the own price effect, that means focus on only the price variable that is that matches to the quantity. Use the t statistic, the p-value, the confidence interval, whatever you want, but be clear about what you're testing there. Okay, and we're looking for 95% confidence level as our criteria, and it's an own price term, meaning it should be negative, right? So anything that wasn't negative there, we would have reason to be suspicious. Judgment explanation on the cross price and income effect, pretty similar. Similar to B, except you're going to cover now the beef price effect and the income effect. One of those is not significant at the 95% level, and the other one is, so that's a distinction that you should make in your answer. The beef price effect is positive, but it also could be zero. And if it were positive and significant, then we might jump into the fray and talk about it's a substitute. But it isn't, so it seems that we might not want to make that claim. Income effect is positive, and it's significant, and that's what we expect. The third question is sort of a variation of true, false, and then explain your answer. And fact, what I've given you are 3 false statements and said fix them or explain what's wrong. And so here they are. The first one says, we see the pork demand is inelastic because the coefficient on the log pork price is less than 0. Well, this one has a problem. Pork demand is inelastic, but it's not because of this reason. Pork demand is inelastic because the own price elasticity is between 0 and -1. Or another way of saying that, if you look here, is I talk about the absolute value of the estimated elasticity is between 0 and 1. So this requires that you know the elasticity is that the coefficient is the elasticity. Or at least you guess that. It also requires you know the definition of inelastic, and these are the things that we check on right after we do our estimates. We try to understand what the economic information that has been sort of gleaned from a statistical estimation. Second one here, these estimates are consistent with downward sloping demand. That seems good. And the homogeneity conditions, that's false. So this is the false part. And so this is, I told you there'd be 5 points around here that you needed to understand homogeneity for, and this is the one place, right? And so if you add up if one, you have to understand that the coefficients on income, beef price, and pork price are all elasticities, and then you need to know that they should sum to 0 to meet the homogeneity condition, and that's how you would answer that question. And then in the third part, we found pork demand is elastic with respect to income. That's false. This part is true, though. It says rising wages, we will see consumers buy more of our product. The second part here is just saying there's a positive income effect. The first part here is saying there's a strong positive income effect. Elastic means income elasticity greater than 1, but that is not what we have. So down here, pork demand is inelastic with respect to income, since it's between 0 and 1. That means if income goes up by 1%, we don't expect to get a full 1% gain in sales of pork. All right, that covers part 1. Part 2 was distinct, and the first thing we did, and the thing we've currently been working back through, has learning objectives on economic analysis of market equilibrium and in the implications for prices. This is I say it a lot, this is a class on ag prices, so we have to make that relation. We focused on single product market up till now, and how shifts to supply and demand have impacted prices. The specific topics, the underpinnings to supply and demand. That means what kind of choice problem do producers and consumers face, because those choice problems are bigger than upward sloping supply, downward sloping demand. They are where we go to understand what things will we expect to have a shift type relationship to supply and demand. Then we went into the relationship between price response, slopes, elasticities, and the equilibrium price, also the quantity. How do shifts to supply and demand impact prices, and what role does price response, again, the slopes or elasticities, play in determining the price impacts when shifts happen to supply and demand? Okay, so a lot going on here, but all of those terms, all of those calculations or derivations we did kept showing us the role of B minus D, or the supply slope minus the demand slope. And it showed up both in determining sort of a basic price or any price term we got, but also how much impact is felt by some shift to demand, and that's going to show up in our questions. The first model, so there were 2 different equation systems here in part 2, and so the first model looked like this. It's just a linear supply, linear demand at a market clearing condition. So the first question is straightforward. Hopefully, if you put anything on your cheat sheet, it should have been a way to, I looked through the cheat sheets just a little bit, and most people did have this, a way to be sure that you know how to solve this. We collect the price terms on one side and then divide through to solve for price. Price is equal to 20, and then Q star, we just plug in the price to get 200. These were also prominently featured in the cheat sheets, the elasticity formulas for supply and demand using equilibrium price and quantity, you should find that the supply elasticity is 1, the demand elasticity is negative 1.5. The sign is important. That demand elasticity needs to be negative. Alright, part C says which side is more elastic, so you really just need to know how to compare these two things. Easiest way is to take the absolute value, and whichever one is larger in absolute value is the more elastic. Okay, this is our distinction. So elastic, when you're evaluating a single measure, says is larger than 1. Being relatively elastic or more elastic just means that you have a larger elasticity or farther from 0, larger in absolute value. Okay, and so that's a key sort of distinction that's going to show up a lot more in the second part of the class. But even if these were both elastic or both inelastic, one of them, as long as they're not the same value or the same absolute value, one of them will be more responsive than the other, and that matters in a market. Question 5 asks you to replace the demand equation with this one. It's the same up to here, but it has a shift variable in it now. Answer the following. What does the standard price analysis equation look like when you add the shift variable? Okay, so you just redo everything. Set the supply equation here, the new demand equation here, collect terms. You'll have 25P is equal to 500 plus Z, and then you get this price equation. So price is equal to 200 plus 1 over 25 times Z. And B says, let me give you a name for that. ZD is the changing preference variable, so it doesn't really have anything specific. I didn't want you trying to write about what happens when the competitor price or beef price or something else moves. Just keep it generic. How would you interpret that equation? Well, we've done this several times. I've written this on the board. The new price, or the price after a shift, is always going to be some combination of the basic price plus whatever the demand shift effect is, and if there had been a supply shift, there would be also that effect. And you can separate those, and that's what's important. So 200 remains sort of the basic price, the price that happens if there's no shift to demand. This is every time Z changes by 1, we get 1/25th of an effect on price. So the standard price analysis always breaks down that way. And then here it just says plug in ZD is equal to plus 5. What's the impact on the port price? So if you plug that in, I believe you'll get 0.2. So the impact of a plus 5 shift to preferences is plus 0.2 to prices. So this confirms something that we get from graphical analysis and something we believe should hold. If you shift demand in a positive direction, prices should go up. Okay, the second model we had in part 2 was one of these equilibrium displacement models. It's percentage change equations for supply and demand, and then the condition that the percentage changes need to match on the quantity side. Here's all the definitions that you would have, and of course the key part here is there's an income effect on the demand side, so the percentage change in income times the income elasticity. So using that equation system, question 6 says, what is the supply elasticity of pork in equation system 2? Explain your answer. So the supply elasticity is just 2 because what is the definition of a supply elasticity? It's percentage change in quantity divided by the percentage change in price. That is the same thing as saying QS, which is a percentage change variable, divided by P, which is the percentage change in price variable. Okay, so that ratio is the elasticity, and so if you take QS is equal to 2P, divide both sides by P, the elasticity must be 2. What is the percentage change price analysis equation? It's basically saying use the QS is equal to QD condition to solve this. So we end up with this, so the supply side, the demand side, you're left with 4P is equal to E, the elasticity times the change in income, and here we have the price is equal to, the change in the percentage change price is equal to 0.25 times the income elasticity times whatever the change in income is. Okay, and it says provide an explanation. I didn't provide one here, but that's what it is. It's percentage change price is equal to 0.25 times the elasticity times the percentage change in income. If income increases by 10%, Y is equal to 10. The market price for pork increases by 2%. P is equal to 2. What is the income elasticity? So that just means substitute into your equation there. 2 is equal to 0.25 times E times 10. If you work that out, you'll have 0.8. And that's the income elasticity that works out into this problem, assuming 2% is the percentage change in price. Okay, so that's our exam. That's what we had the chance to do. We're going to continue to work forward from these percentage change models more, and then kind of work our way through some extra topics. I'm not sure exactly when the exams will go back. The goal is Monday, but more likely to be Wednesday, given the amount of partial credit that will need to be determined. And I've only looked through them a little bit as of now, but I do appreciate all the hard work and the studying and the preparation really shows up in the cheat sheets. Maybe I didn't give enough sort of limits and say, this stuff isn't going to be on there. A lot of people put extra stuff on there, but that's okay too. It's good to review everything we've done. So I don't think there were a lot of surprises. I saw a lot of people at least found 4 questions that looked like they really knew how to start them. So I'm really, as of now, and not having read them very closely, pretty pleased with everything that happened, and looking forward to taking on the second half of this class with you. So thanks for watching this. Remember, there's going to be a short quiz that'll cover just a couple of things I've said in here, just to check and see if you watch this. So you can move on to that quiz now.